Dear Mikhail Sergeyev, thank you for joining me. It is a great honor. You were born and raised in Moscow, Russia, and then came to the United States for postgraduate and doctoral studies in the early 1990s. You have been a professor of religion and philosophy at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, but have also served at the Wilmette Institute and on the faculty of Temple University in Philadelphia. You have also taught courses at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. You have written the very interesting book, Theory of Religious Cycles, Tradition, Modernity, and the Bahá'í Faith, which was published in 2015, but also another book, Sophiology in Russian Orthodoxy, Soloviev, Bulgakov, Losky, and Berdyaev in 2006. You have published quite a number of academic papers, and you have also edited several series of books, some relating to contemporary Russian philosophical thought and some to Bahá'í philosophy. The ones relating to Bahá'í philosophy that I know about are Studies in Bahá'í Philosophy in 2018, Studies in Bahá'í Epistemology in 2021, and Religion and Science in a Globalized World in 2022. And I think there are more forthcoming that I might not know about. One of the reasons I have asked you for an interview is that I have found your perspective on Bahá'í philosophy to be quite distinct from those of other scholars. So maybe we could start with this, your take on Bahá'í philosophy. In Theology and Philosophy, which is one of your chapters in The World of the Bahá'í Faith, a book edited by Robert Stockman, you say the following: theology and philosophy can either be developed separately or joined together in the form of scriptural philosophy. In the second case, religious scriptures become part of rational philosophical discourse. You seem to present here two possible directions of travel, that of a theology that constitutes itself outside of rational philosophical discourse in some way, and that to which you refer to as scriptural philosophy. Can we discuss these two cases? First, how would a theology constitute itself outside the domain of rational philosophical discourse? And then second, if we could focus more at length on what is a scriptural philosophy. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And thank you for this presentation of my work. I would make one clarification, however. I was born not in Russia, but in the Soviet Union. So I come from the Soviet Union, and that is very important clarification because the Soviet Union and the mystery of the rise and fall of the USSR became the center of my philosophical reflection. And the book that you mentioned about the theory of religious cycles actually originated from my answers to this question, the fall and rise of the Soviet Union. That's probably what makes me different in my approach to Baha'i philosophy, because usually Baha'i philosophers deal with the history of Baha'i thought, the Sheikhi movement, the Babi movement, the Baha'i movement. They trace the origin, the history, number one. And second, they approach Baha'i thought from a Western perspective. I also consider myself an American of Russian descent. However, this Russian descent is essential to my personal understanding of Baha'i thought. So this is number one. Number two, about theology and philosophy. In the Middle Ages, as we know, theology and philosophy was one and the same thing, at least in the Christian tradition. And the distinction between philosophy and theology dates back to, I may be wrong about the correct century, but I think to the 14th century, when one of the Christian philosophers suggested a very simple thing. Back then, philosophy was under theology. It was the servant of theology. And philosophers were kind of suffering from that because that union did not allow them enough freedom of thought. So one of the Christian philosophers suggested the separation. And the separation was based on a very simple fact that theology deals with things that are beyond human understanding. Theology discusses scriptural texts and talks about the existence and the attributes of God, angels, spiritual world, life after death. But all those topics are beyond our contemporary understanding while we are alive in the material universe. So while philosophy, according to that guy, had to deal with everything that is within our human understanding. And this idea received a wide recognition. And since then, if you go to the university in the United States, you will see the Department of Theology and the Department of Philosophy. Those departments are separated. And the main difference is that in the Department of Theology, you focus on the study of scriptures. In the Department of Philosophy, you focus on the study of human rationality and various philosophical approaches to the world, regardless of whether you are religious or not. Now, theology and philosophy may also intersect. And when they intersect, at least in the history of philosophy, when they intersected, I'm talking about scriptural philosophy. Now, what is scriptural philosophy? If we stand on the ground of epistemology, the theory of knowledge, the theory of how we acquire knowledge, we can say that human beings have 5 basic ways to gain knowledge. Number 1, through our senses. Number 2, through our reason. Number 3, through our intuition. Number 4, through our tradition. And number 5, through revelation. Of course, in Buddhism, that would not be a revelation. It would be called differently, the Buddha's enlightenment, but the idea is the same. By revelation, I mean some knowledge that is not accessible to ordinary human beings. So when you focus your philosophy on empirical data, you are called empiricist philosopher. When you focus your philosophy on human reason, you are called rationalist philosopher. If you focus on intuition, human intuition, you will be called intuitivist or philosopher. When, like Confucius, you focus on tradition, you will be called a traditionalist philosopher. And finally, if you accept revelation or some kind of supernatural knowledge that comes from usually the founder of a religion, you will be called a scriptural philosopher. A scriptural philosopher is not the philosopher who simply deduces some truths from scriptures. No, you simply accept your particular scriptures as part of your philosophical reasoning. But being a part of your philosophical reasoning, this does not mean that you disregard reason, empirical evidence, tradition, intuition, etc. Scriptural philosophy was invented by Indian philosophers. And in the histories of Western philosophy, in the textbooks, this is usually overlooked. Because the Western tradition of scriptural philosophy was started by Philo of Alexandria, who was the contemporary of Cicero, Seneca, and Jesus Christ. But in the East or in Asia, Scriptural philosophy was started by Indians back in the 4th century before the Common Era, but we do not have the exact dates and sometimes the exact centuries, but we know that Indian darshanas or Indian schools of religious philosophy were developed before the Christian era. So Indians are the creators of that type of philosophy. And what that means, I will repeat it again, what that means is that when doing philosophy, you start with all 5 kinds of knowledge, including empirical knowledge, rational knowledge, intuitivist knowledge, tradition, meaning usually tradition of interpretation of scriptures, and scriptures themselves, revelation. The main focus of Indian or Hindu philosophers was to defend their scriptural texts, the truth of their scriptural texts from the rationalist point of view. As I said, in the West, this kind of philosophy started by Philo of Alexandria, who became the cornerstone, the main pillar of the so-called medieval philosophy, because Christian philosophers were influenced by Philo, and also Muslim philosophers. He himself was a Jewish philosopher, so he started it, and the tradition of scriptural philosophy ended with Spinoza in the 17th century. So the tradition of scriptural philosophy flourished from the 1st through the 17th century, and it ended because of the biblical criticism, because the scholars developed various ways to analyze the scriptures, and they undermined many of the traditional views about the scriptures, mainly about the Bible, the Jewish scriptures, and the New Testament. Spinoza was one of the pioneers of biblical criticism, and that's why Spinoza is considered as the end of scriptural philosophy. However, I personally think that scriptural philosophy is not dead. It develops in waves. The first wave of scriptural philosophy belongs to Hinduism, the second wave to Buddhism, the third wave to Judaism, the fourth wave to Islam, the fifth wave to Christianity. And I think Baha'i faith will eventually develop the sixth wave of scriptural philosophy. So that probably would be my very short answer to your question.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive and very interesting at the same time. I'm trying to think, and maybe I'll try to describe a little bit what I think are maybe some attempts in favor of a Baha'i theology that I've seen around. I'm no expert in this, but I have maybe a few ideas that I can put forward and just see like how that differs or not from scriptural philosophy. That could be maybe useful for me, or maybe it won't be. We can just try. So when I think of attempts at a Baha'i theology, and I know somewhere you've said very clearly we don't have an established, Baha'i theology or Baha'i philosophy, so we keep that in mind. So when I think about the theology, first things that come to mind are the kind of what sounds to me like the apophatic theology of Dr. Dávúdí. And I I don't know enough about Dr. Dávúdí. I'm just referencing an article in the Journal of Baha'i Studies, which was entitled "A Discourse on Baha'i Theology," a treatise by Dr. Alid Murad Dávúdí on God and Revelation. And I think in that kind of article, the notion appears that God is ultimately beyond human language, concepts, and categories, and the most accurate accurate way to speak about God is through negation, silence, and paradox. And as a theological discourse, I thought that was quite powerful in a way. Okay. Second, I can think of Udo Schaefer, and I think his take is different. I think in his view, theology is understood as commitment to the truth of revelation and to the authority of Scripture. And this has primacy over and above reason and individual autonomy, while retaining a scientific methodology and scientific reasoning, but as supporting mechanisms on issues not theological. And I'm quoting from him, he basically says, theology, the science of faith, he uses the Latin usage, is a closed system based on revelation, which is beyond the reach of scientific discourse. And that kind of presupposes an innate ability on the believers to discern and adhere to revealed truths, especially through the church's guidance and through their own faith. So those are two perspectives, and then if I go very fast, I can mention maybe I think Julius Savi, he emphasizes a divine theology in the Baha'i writings, which Baha'is only need to systematize for Baha'i theology to be in their hands. So it's almost like the theologies exist already there in the Baha'i writings, and it will emerge through the guidance of the Universal House of Justice, but also through some kind of derivative theology on behalf of Baha'i scholars. And what is distinctive here is that this theology is also based on irfan, so kind of gnosis, where knowledge refers to the spatial, intuitive, and direct knowledge of the divine, involving even a personal experience of the divine in some case. So that kind of line of thinking goes back to the Sufi school of illuminationism with Suhrawardi, and maybe Mullah Sadra and Ibn Arabi are also part of it. And slightly different, but somewhat similar, is the view of Jack McLean that intuitive knowledge, the knowledge of the heart, or mystical knowledge, or faith can all be considered different forms of religious knowledge that have primacy, thou not exclusivity, over reason and acquired knowledge. And I think what is distinctive about him is he argues that this proposed theology states that the academic study of a religion should proceed from within that particular religious tradition, based on the primacy of its irreducible, authoritative, objective, and normative truths, so doctrines, and of its forms of mystical knowledge and experience over forms of reason. So that is to say that you need that experiential, you need that experiential knowledge of participating in the life of a religious community, and that kind of pattern of faith and action in order to understand the text of that religion and so forth. This also links back to Sufi philosophy and Irfan. And he also sees like a sort of Baha'i source theology that exists there in the writings and will just kind of be manifested through the guidance of the House of Justice, and some lower level of derivative theology on minor issues, which maybe normal scholars or Baha'is will develop over time. When I think about these things, I see scriptural philosophy as somewhat different. Tao, and this is why I get a bit confused before. There is a sort of primacy of the revelation and even of I don't know, divine knowledge in some sense. But then there's also the reason, the fact that reason is present and is not subservient in a kind of complete way, or subservient in general, like it might appear, or deprioritized in relationship to other elements like supra-rational maybe reason and things like that. So just wondering Well, like if you have a take on these things, if you don't have one, that's also fine. I mean, I'm throwing things at you without any preparation.
Yeah, that's fine. And you touched upon actually various themes. So let me sort this out and let me answer one by one. So the first topic is about theology. What does theology actually do? The word theology comes from two words, theos and logos. And theology, formally speaking, means the study of God. It was first done by Aristotle. And the God of Aristotle was the God of the philosophers. He thought of God being the mind who thinks of itself. Now, theology in revealed religions, and by saying revealed religions, I also include Buddhism. Religions that are based on some knowledge that are not available to ordinary human beings. Okay, so theology that is based on this kind of knowledge has a second task. The first task, the study of God, as you said yourself, quoting from Mr. Dávúdí, is impossible to fulfill. You can say nothing about God. You may study God, but there is nothing there to study. It's like the character in the novel who is trying to study the author of the novel. They are on different planes of existence. Yes, the author of the novel could introduce himself within the novel. So a character that would be called the author. But the character who is called the author would not be the same as the author himself or herself. Okay? So theology, from the first point of view, the study of God, comes to nothing, as you yourself said, meaning that we can say nothing about God except for negations. This so-called apophatic theology is a tricky way to avoid the fact that theology from this perspective is not possible. And this tradition started by Philo of Alexandria, who said exactly the same thing, and was repeated by many Christian theologians and by Maimonides in the Jewish tradition, etc. So it is a well-established tradition of theology that leads nowhere. Because this is the essence of monotheism. The essence of monotheism is that God is beyond creation. And since we are part of creation, we cannot have adequate knowledge about the Creator. So that is number one. But this does not mean that theology is cannot contribute, because there is the second part of theology. Theology, in this second hermeneutical aspect, is the study of the scriptural texts. And frankly, I'm preparing another book in the series that you mentioned that would be called something like Studies in Bahá'í Theology and Hermeneutics. Because in this second meaning, theology simply is the study of the scriptural text, and it may intersect with philosophy or it may not intersect with philosophy. Let me show you when it does not intersect. Scriptures are not only about worldviews, not only about philosophical points. Scriptures are also about moral injunctions. They are about the laws that the believers are required to follow. They include prayers, meditative practices, religious rituals, many other things. So the study of scriptures does mean that you study the scriptures as the ultimate knowledge about those religious requirements and the requirements of religious behavior, the requirements of your obligation as a member of that religious community. And that has little to do with philosophy. philosophy is not about how to pray. So here, theology has its own domain of existence, which has little to do, formally speaking, with philosophy, number one. Number two, philosophy, on the other hand, may intersect with theology, but it has its own domain that may or may not intersect with what we call theology. Because philosophy is about a comprehensive view of the world and its foundations, of the place of human beings in this world. Philosophy gives you the broadest horizons of your existence. Now, let me clarify what I personally mean by philosophy. I came from the Soviet Union, and in the Soviet Union, philosophy was considered to be a part of science. The first philosopher, Western philosopher, who thought of philosophy as being scientific was Aristotle. I think this project of scientific philosophy was continued by Descartes. And it culminated with the so-called analytic tradition of philosophy in the Anglo-American world. So in this respect, Anglo-American analytic tradition and Marxist, Leninist, Soviet tradition actually are in tune with each other. However, I personally think that philosophy is not a science, period. You know, scientific pursuit is one thing. Philosophy is another thing. Religion is the third thing. Art is the fourth thing. Human beings have more ways to understand the world than simply a scientific pursuit. Here are some of my arguments for my position. Number one, in the history of philosophy, philosophy was not able to give us any laws about anything, basically. When you study science, you don't have to study the history of science. You have to study the current situation with scientific knowledge. In philosophy, you cannot start with the current situation in philosophical knowledge. You have to study the whole history of philosophy. What does it tell you? It tells you that philosophy does not progress linearly like science. And therefore, philosophy cannot be a system of knowledge that should be accepted by everyone. You know, this is a great advantage of science, that it gives us universal truths. Philosophy does not provide universal truth, meaning that it does not provide truths for every human being. Philosophy gives some people the roots of their existence, but those roots are not mandatory for other people. So philosophy is a very individualist enterprise, number one. Number two, the major difference between philosophy and science is that science deals with material world. I have not heard about scientific pursuits of knowledge of the spiritual world. And I don't think I will ever have, because spiritual world is completely different from the material world. As Abdul Baha said, there is no time, there is no space, there are no laws there. So how can you have a science of the spiritual world? You can't. Science is not personal. It doesn't really matter who discovered the theory of relativity. Newton, Einstein, Uncle Sam, John Doe. The law is still the same. So it is an impersonal knowledge about material world. Philosophy is a completely different endeavor. Every philosophical system has an imprint of the personality of the philosopher. And you like some philosophers, you don't like other philosophers. Philosophy is not about material world. Philosophy about the spiritual world and the meaning of life. So to conclude, philosophy cannot be the servant of science. Philosophy cannot be the servant of theology. Philosophy is a separate endeavor which can or cannot be tied to religion. We know that there are atheist philosophers, and which basically accommodates people, makes them, gives them meaning of life in this world. So what are the consequences of this view? And this is my view of philosophy. The consequences for Baha'i thought is that I do not anticipate the Baha'i philosophy, one system of thought that everyone should accept. I think that would be devastating. Philosophy is based on the freedom, on the free search for truth. And as we know, that is the first principle of Baha'i faith, the free, independent search for truth. So what I anticipate is the emergence in time of various Baha'i philosophical systems. All of them would be somehow connected to Baha'i scriptures, but they will be different. There will be different schools, different understandings, and again, philosophical questions, at least classical philosophical questions, are: what is the nature of reality? Who am I? What should I do? Ethics, logic, how should I argue? And now we may include aesthetics, what is beautiful. And among those questions, there are no questions about, again, prayers, religious obligations, etc. So philosophy is distinct in this case from theology, but it does not mean that it is distinct from the scriptures. The scriptures are part of scriptural philosophy if you develop a scriptural philosophy. Now, to your question about reason being independent, or at least kind of equal to scriptural texts in scriptural philosophy. In any scriptural philosophy, scriptural texts are the foundation of the worldview of the person who follows that religion. And any follower understands that the truth embedded in the scriptures is beyond ordinary human knowledge. Okay? So there are certain things that we simply cannot understand. But that does not mean, number one, that we should not try to understand as many things as possible. And number two, that we should simply forget about reason and follow the teachings without thinking. Abdul Baha himself said that our time requires rational proofs. And rational proofs are what philosophy is about. Your third theme or topic is about mysticism, mystical experience, human intuition. Now, I agree that human intuition or even mystical experience, not mystical, but let's say visionary experience, even you have some extraordinary experience, that number one, they do exist, and number two, they supersede they may supersede our rational experience. Yes. Intuitively, we may understand sometimes more that we could understand by rational thinking. But here is the problem with any mystical experience. It is unique to the person who experiences it. And if we look at the history of mysticism, we will see many mystics who have experiences that are contradictory to each other. And since those experiences are unique, how could you distinguish which one is true and which one is not? I think visionary experience and mystical experience, although existing, should be checked by reason in some way or another. It doesn't mean that we should reject them. If people have visionary experiences and those experiences help them, that's great. But they should not impose those experiences, the truths of those experiences into others who did not have them. Let me give you an example. I have a friend, a former professor of philosophy in Colorado, Boulder. He's retired now. He had and still have visionary experiences. He talks to God, and God talks back. Now, what should I do with this? He is completely sane. He delivers papers on epistemology. He participates in some scholarly work in the American Academy of Religion. He does not want to create any religion of his own. He does not consider himself a prophet. I asked him directly, and he said, "No, I'm not a prophet. I'm simply a person who has strange visionary experience." I asked him, "Are you sure that you are talking to God?" He said, "As a philosopher, I cannot be sure. But that's what the voice, which is not in his head, I should add, that's what the voice tells me. So I either accept it or I either reject it. I decided to accept it and to see what happens." So how should I deal with that? I deal with that sympathetically, especially if this helps this person to live his life. If it gives meaning to his life, okay, that's fine. Although Baha'u'llah warns that whoever claims a direct experience from God is a liar before 1,000 years. So I have both things in mind. But again, this is the problem with any visionary experience. When I was 26, I had a vision of my future life. It lasted for a couple of seconds, and this vision is now fulfilled, I hope. So some people may believe this, some people may disbelieve this, but I know that I had this experience. So that's the problem with those personal, unique experiences. So we are coming back to those things that give us shared experience. And empirical evidence, rational proof, are the two basic forms of human experience that humans share with each other, whether they are religious or not, whether they belong to Christianity or Bahá'í faith or Islam, etc. You cannot defend Bahá'í faith by saying that our scriptures are true, because neither Christians, nor Muslims, nor Hindus, nor Buddhists will not buy it. Simply, this simple affirmation from your scriptures will not be bought by any religious person. It will not be bought by atheists. So therefore, you always have to come up with some reasoning, and you cannot avoid rationality and rely completely on scriptures. Although you know that for you, the scriptures represent the ultimate truth.
I feel like asking then, there is also the view that we need to extract meaning from a given revelation in order to apply it to social reality. And a lot of that process eventually has to go, I would think. I mean, there's different options one can take, but to me, it looks like one of the options is to somehow put in some kind of dialogue, in some kind of way, the contents of the scriptures with academic disciplines that cover different problems, right? Or domains of expertise, not only academic disciplines. And to do that straight from a theological language or straight from the language of the revelation, like to transpose that straight into the context of the academic disciplines, that seems very difficult. And it's also the case that within academic disciplines, you kind of need a philosophy. So even if we don't have any religion, if you want to develop an educational curriculum, you need some kind of philosophy of education, right? So if you also have religion, then it looks like as if you would need a philosophy of education to be derived somehow, and maybe there could be many, but somehow to be derived or sanctioned or validated by the religious perspective, and then to power a particular educational curriculum. And so if that stands as a sort of argument, then philosophy becomes this kind of interface between religious language and maybe theology to some degree, and the academic disciplines. So translating religious scriptures into ways of organizing and thinking academically, but also in terms of applying to social reality such concepts, seems to imply philosophy again, unless you can make the case that we can develop a theology that speaks directly to those disciplines, but the language doesn't seem to translate. And to add to that, you can also think, you've mentioned this in some of your works, that there are different types of philosophies one can look at. So you can have ontology or political philosophy or other types of philosophies, and I think that also plays into this picture.
So I think you have two themes in your questions. The first theme is application to social reality. I think with Baha'i faith, it's pretty easy, I should say. And you don't have to develop a theological language to make application to contemporary social reality, because Baha'i faith, although being a religion with all of its parts, including mysticism, etc., it is focused on the social reconstruction of the world. And we have our Baha'i principles that are fitting what the world needs. I will not repeat those principles, everyone knows them, but these are the ways to implement social transformation and social practice. This is number one. Number two is about education and educational curriculum. I have been an educator for 35 years, and I have my own views about the philosophy of education. And those views are controversial, to say the least. I observed education in the Soviet Union. I observed education in the United States. Both systems had their advantages and disadvantages. But educators, those who want to develop a new kind of curriculum, I think should understand that real education comes not from what you teach, but from who is teaching. That is the main principle of good education. It is not an accident that in India, to get a good education, you have to choose your own teacher, your own master. It depends on who is going to teach you more than on what you are going to be taught. That is my experience. I think I was a good educator. At least my classes were always full, and people were waiting for a couple of years to sign up for my classes to register because, there was no place for them. And the reason for that, my colleagues would usually ask me, so how am I attracting those students? And I could not answer them because the answer was they are attracted by my personality. That's it. Nothing else. I could teach philosophy, religion, math, physics. It doesn't really matter because my personality would not change as a result. Because they like how I treat them, because they like how I talk to them, because they like how I joke with them, etc. I think that is the most important thing in education, which cannot be pre-planned. So therefore, let's step back and let's not think that we are in control of our educational system. When my colleagues would push me into an answer, because those people, and sometimes educators are very strange people, they overvalue their profession. And in some of the meetings, they were explicitly telling us that, we have to create a curriculum that would make people geniuses. And they would ask, Michael, what is your view on how do we make geniuses? and I said, okay, I have a plan. There was a famous writer and philosopher, Fyodor Dostoevsky. And he was a beginner when a horrible thing happened to him. He just read a letter by one Russian writer, Nikolai Gogol, by one Russian literary critic, Belinsky, to Gogol. And this letter, there was nothing wrong or serious or controversial, but Russia back then was an authoritarian state, and everything was censored. It was reported that Dostoevsky read this forbidden letter out loud. Oh my God, what a crime. And Dostoevsky was arrested and condemned to capital punishment by hanging. So he was waiting. He described this episode in one of his novels. So he was waiting to be hanged, and it was a specially devised plan. And while he was waiting, a dispatch from the Tsar, the person came and declared that this capital punishment is replaced by 6 years in Siberia, hard labor in Siberia. So they knew that they would not hang him, but they wanted him to be scared to death and remember that moment. After 6 years of hard labor in Siberia, where he was not allowed to read anything but the Bible was the only book that was allowed to be read, Dostoevsky completely changed his views, reversed his views, just 180%. And after that, he became the real Dostoevsky. So after telling this story, I would say to my fellow educators, so what I propose is a 1-year internship in Siberia, hard labor in Siberia. So that would help. At least that would help Russia. Free labor, after all. And maybe that would help our university students. Everybody laughed, but it shows the absurdity of thinking that you can educate a genius like you can create an automobile, a car. Now, the second part of the question is the curriculum. That is a serious question that is within our control. And if we look at history, what we call the Renaissance was simply a change in the curriculum. The education was changed, and as a result, the culture was changed. Now, the American educational curriculum now is oriented toward the so-called exact sciences, everything that is measurable, with math being the queen of sciences. Everything that is not measurable, and that's what we are dealing with, religion, philosophy, art, is either pushed away or, going down 1 or 2 levels, because people believe that those disciplines, and by the way, when Shoghi Effendi was talking about philosophy, he was very smart not to call it a science. He called it a discipline. Yes, humanities are not exact sciences. And now people think that only exact sciences can be useful and helpful. I think that is an extremely wrong approach. Because without humanities, without a broad understanding of human culture, without studying religion, philosophy, art, human beings are becoming not just one-sided, not just one-dimensional. They lose their true humanity. And I think in the future curriculum, whatever it would be, humanities would play a much bigger role. Scientists are trying to quantify humanities. And that is another ridiculous thing that is happening in American universities. You have to set goals, a series of concrete goals, and you have to check whether this goal is met, this goal is not met. This is crazy. Because you cannot teach humanities by setting up goals. The most important work for educator in the humanities is to awaken their curiosity, is to awaken their independent critical thinking, is to make them love humanities in general, and to sow the seeds of culture, because culture is not quantifiable by definition. And I always tell my students, now you are bored, you are yawning, you are trying not to pay attention, but you will remember me in 20 years. And you will say to yourself, oh, how stupid I was not to listen to this guy. Because there would be a moment for any human being when this human being would think about the meaning of life, the world he or she lives in, and math will not save them. That's it.
I like that very much. Would you say then that ethics originate not only in the religious domain, but also in the humanities broadly, or values and ethics?
Look, you cannot have a person like John Locke thought. You cannot have a person who is tabula rasa. Maybe you are born as a tabula rasa, but I frankly doubt that. But you are educated by the family, by the school, by the university, and all of this this social environment produces inside you some values. What is the ultimate origin of these values? Religion. All those values come from religion. That's why people who become atheists are still and may still be a good moral people, because in their reason, in their rational domain, they lost their faith, but in their subconscious, they are still fed by those moral principles that had originated from religious past. So I personally do not believe that ethics is possible without religion. It is possible during the crisis of religious consciousness, but it is possible simply because people follow the trajectory of their parents and grandparents without thinking about that. If you are a hardcore atheist, and if you think it through for yourself, you may well end up in total amoralism or immoralism. And the only way to stop you from crime would be the danger of being caught. That is another good source of morality. This is number one. Number two, you cannot become a good moral person by taking several courses on ethics. You may take, many courses on ethics and still become a Stalin or someone like this guy. Here comes the part that my students hate and love at the same time. I usually tell them that human beings are not born to be happy. Happiness is for imbeciles, because the ultimate goal of human beings is become spiritual. And you cannot grow spiritually without suffering. And if you have not suffered and you are totally happy, then you have some problems with your psyche. You probably are retarded or something like this. Suffering is an inalienable part of our life education, not university education or life education. It is suffering that makes you a morally good person, or it destroys you. It all depends on how you meet it and how you deal with it. So that is my answer. And if you look at the history of humanity, you will see that the best people suffered most. And at the same time, those people exactly made the greatest impact on the development of humanity. We remember those people. We do not remember who was the Pharaoh of the time of Moses, or we may, Ramesses II, maybe. We don't remember who was the emperor of Rome in the times of Jesus, etc. So therefore, if you want to become a good ethical person, try to be a saint. That's what I tell my students. Do not try to be an American president. When people are campaigning for the highest office in the United States, and they give speeches that they do this because they love the American people, because they want to make America great again, I cannot but laugh because power and spirituality are not compatible with each other. You either go one way or another way. And that is evident in all religions. Jesus was tempted by the devil to have all the kingdoms on earth, and he rejected that offer. The Buddha, was the prince, and he could have become the king, but he refused that. This is a general human experience. Power and spirituality are not compatible with each other.
Thank you. Let me just ask another quick question about scriptural philosophy. When I think of some of the examples you've given, such as Philo of Alexandria or Thomas Aquinas, I always have in my mind that those are examples where there is some kind of synthesis being done between a religious tradition and maybe a main type of philosophy. So, like Thomas Aquinas, for example, you think he's bringing together the Christian revelation with Aristotelian philosophy and Neoplatonic metaphysics. So, this kind of, you could say there's two elements or three elements, depending how you look at it. And I'm thinking, I mean, I'm thinking of asking, but maybe I already know your answer. I don't know. That how would you approach, so how would someone approach scriptural philosophy from a Baha'i perspective today if you think that might imply a synthesis of some sorts? What would that synthesis be with or how would one proceed with scriptural philosophy today?
Yes, that is a good question. Actually, that is the key question.
Thank you.
In ancient Greece, yes, philosophy was very strong, was represented by various schools, and as we see now, it is still alive. People are still talking about Plato, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Stoics. Back in the days of Plato and Aristotle, there was this debate between Plato and his disciple Aristotle, who was the first to harshly criticize Plato's theory of ideas. And what happened in the history of philosophy, of Western philosophy, was that Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jew, a committed Jew, he was trying to synthesize, as you rightly pointed out, he was trying to synthesize Jewish thought, which he thought is superior to ancient pagan philosophy, mainly with Platonism, partly with Stoicism. Aristotelian philosophy was not well received. Well, it was well received, but not as well as Platonism in the eyes of Philo. So his goal was to synthesize Judaism with Platonism. And in his philosophy, he included Plato's ideas. In his philosophy, Plato's ideas became not merely ideas, but the thoughts within God's mind. And that became the mainstream of religious philosophy for centuries. Now, when it comes to St. Thomas Aquinas, it is a slightly different thing. The whole of medieval philosophy is trying to synthesize religion, and I'm talking about various religions, Judaism, Maimonides, Islam, not Ibn Sina, who was Neoplatonist, but Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who was an Aristotelian, and St. Thomas Aquinas, who was an Aristotelian, first of all. So the whole project of medieval philosophy was to synthesize revelation with Aristotle, because Aristotle became to be seen as the philosopher. He was called the philosopher. After that, around the 14th century, Christian philosophers finally went further, because the main problem of medieval philosophy was the problem of universals. And Plato gave his answer to the question about universals. Aristotle, Plato's answer was, I would say, radical, that those universals exist by themselves as eideses, ideas. Aristotle was more moderate. He thought that ideas exist not by themselves, but inside the objects. But philosophers never went further, and I mean the Western philosophers never went further. But by the 14th century, they realized that there are two other options, that universals exist as concepts in our minds. That was the position of Abelard, I think, conceptualism, and finally, the position of nominalism, that universals do not exist at all. These are simply a conventional way of describing certain things. And it is through this revolution that medieval philosophy as a project ended. Because the whole of Western philosophy, from Socrates through Thomas Aquinas, was based on one presupposition. The presupposition was that our thought and the so-called being, the universe around us, are compatible, that we can penetrate with our thought to the essence of the world. And since the 14th century, Christian thinkers rejected that assumption. They prefer to think that language is not referential, and that by means of thinking, reasoning, thinking, and language, we cannot penetrate to the essence of the world. So this rejection ended the medieval philosophical project, and centuries later, it became practically the dominant view in the Western philosophical tradition. If you take philosophers like Heidegger, Derrida, Foucault, etc. Now, the goal, one more thing before I talk about Bahá'í scriptural philosophy. When the medieval philosophy has ended, the new philosophical project arose. And that philosophical project may be called the second wave of rationalism. The second wave of rationalism starts in the 17th century. Spinoza develops biblical criticism and ends the scriptural philosophy in the West. Descartes develops a new rationalism, rejects some of the Aristotelian ideas about science, and develops science on a new foundation. Since then, in the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, Western philosophy, which became dominant globally, Western philosophy is developed as another rationalist project. Not a continuation of Plato and Aristotle, but still on the basis of rationalism. But modern Western rationalism is quite different from ancient Greek rationalism. Starting from Kant, modern Western rationalists reject the idea that we can know the essence of things. They become things in themselves. That is the ultimate rejection of the medieval philosophical project. But if we do not know things in themselves, it seems that philosophy loses its purpose, because since Aristotle, the purpose of philosophy was to be the queen of sciences and to penetrate the essences of things. being qua being. And hence, Western philosophers find themselves in a very strange situation. Their profession has ended, and philosophy seems to be in crisis. And people are trying to find a way out of this crisis by various means in the 19th and the 20th century. And in this context, I see the ultimate purpose of Bahá'í scriptural philosophy is to synthesize the new wave of rationalism, modern rationalism, with its rejection of knowing things in themselves, with Bahá'í revelation, and to create a philosophy. Again, for me, it's not the philosophy. It's my personal project. I would like to create such a philosophy that could be rationally consistent with what modern philosophers have been doing for the last 3 centuries, starting with Kant, with the Bahá'í revelation that I believe to be true. And the main issue here is the so-called metaphysics. Metaphysics was traditionally a branch of philosophy, starting with Aristotle, not with Aristotle, with his successors, who placed his book on first philosophy after his book on physics. So, but traditionally metaphysics, which was accepted by most philosophers before Kant in the West, was a branch of philosophy that dealt with the ultimate questions. Since Kant, metaphysics is either impossible or possible as an exact science. I believe that metaphysics is not possible as an exact science. I believe that metaphysics, if possible, is possible only as a religious metaphysics, because we are talking about subjects that are beyond our comprehension and understanding. And I believe that we have to deal with those subjects using a different strategy. Well, let me give you one example. And again, that is my personal approach. I do not impose this on anyone, and I do not think that I present an authoritative philosophy in any way. That is my own way of dealing with the issue of adjusting Bahá'í faith to modern Western thought, because without doing that, we cannot progress. So here is one example. Baha'u'llah talks about creation, about the spiritual world, about the will of God creating everything, etc. So we may accept this as at a face value. But then we do not understand what this actually means, because we have no idea about God. We have no idea about the fullness of creation. We have no idea about how these processes may have worked. So therefore, we have to adjust the meaning of those sentences and paragraphs in terms of our human understanding. And our human understanding presupposes not only rational thinking, but empirical evidence. Whatever we understand should be based on empirical evidence. If there is no empirical evidence of God in the world, then we cannot have the idea of God. So therefore, the whole story about creation can be interpreted from a human perspective as a story about the prophet or the messenger of God, who, by God's will, creates the universe, meaning creates a religion, because every religion is a universe of meaning. And the whole story of creation, seen from that perspective, can be understood by any human being because it has empirical evidence. So personally, again, as a Baha'i philosopher, I'm against metaphysics. I'm anti-metaphysician, and I think that this view, supported by Kant in the West and by Nagarjuna in the East, one of my heroes, and by Lao Tzu in China, yes, this worldview tells me that my thought cannot penetrate the essence of being, of a universe, of God. And since I cannot understand those things, I have to adjust my understanding by transferring it to my human level of reasoning. And that would be the way I hopefully would synthesize Baha'i philosophy with modern philosophical thinking. I think my approach is pretty unique from what I know.
In terms of Baha'i scholarship, I would definitely agree with that from what I know. I have not seen that before. I haven't even understood this perspective, and so I'm very happy for the opportunity to have you here, because even from reading some of the things you have wrote, I didn't really understand this whole wider dimension.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You have not understood this wider dimension because it does not exist yet in the writings.
Thank you. that makes me feel more confident. I'm curious about. I remember, so I want to bring this in purely because I have never seen it discussed at all in a kind of, well, I haven't seen it discussed in a video or in writing. There is a chapter by Jean-Marc Lepain in the volume in Studies in Baha'i Philosophy entitled The Concept of Nature in Baha'i Philosophy. And I really appreciated that chapter because it was, again, a unique attempt. I haven't seen anything like it before or after. And the attempt was to relate something like Baha'i metaphysics, maybe I'm wrong to use that word, to the ontology of science and to scientific disciplines like physics, biology. And it's a very interesting exercise in which he kind of, to some extent, he argues like you that it's impossible to do that, but then he kind of proposes an intermediate solution where he identifies some macro concepts Baha'i, from the Baha'i writings, maybe from a Baha'i metaphysics, that could have some relevance or at least be in accordance with key concepts from the modern ontology of science, like interconnection of reality and things like that. And I thought just trying to do that has a lot of value, but it's very hard for me with my lack of expertise to really evaluate that whole perspective beyond thinking it's really useful to try to do that, even if over some long period of time we don't get anywhere. I think it's still very, very useful to do that, and I haven't seen another attempt.
Now, about Jean-Marc, first of all, if he ever watches this video, I have to reprimand him because for about several years I was trying to officially publish this book of his, Archaeology of the Kingdom of God. And he is a perfectionist. He writes and rewrites and rewrites and rewrites. So Jean-Marc, if you watch me, please stop doing this. We have to publish the final authoritative version of your book because this is important. Number one. Number two, from what I know, I may be wrong, but from what I know, Jean-Marc is a metaphysician. He struggled for years with this problem, for metaphysics or against metaphysics. I have struggled with this also for decades, and I think I went against it. He went for it. So great, good for him. I think synthetic a priori or a priori, Kantian synthetic a priori, that is the basis of metaphysics, are not possible as scientific statements, but are possible only as revelation. Baha'u'llah's revelation represents synthetic a priori statements, which are not available to us ordinary human beings. Number one. Number two, science is not my interest at all, because philosophy is not about science. I'm done with Aristotle, with Aristotelian being qua being. This is useless. I think that the most interesting direction of philosophy is the direction proposed by Lao Tzu. That says that understanding is beyond words, and by Nagarjuna in India and by Kant in the West, that this direction that is slowly crystallizing is the most promising, because it does not make reason the only authority in life. It leaves place for visions, intuition, mysticism, and it does not see language as the only tool of expression. We know that when we meet a person, 99% of information about that person we get from visual impressions, not from what this person says. So that's why it's hard for me to comment on Jean-Marc's attempt to connect revelation to science. I think it's useless. Science is science. Science is based on experiments. Science is based on certain presuppositions, axioms that are taken for granted. Axioms come from nowhere and may be rejected later on. But philosophy of science, again, is not my cup of tea, so to say. Whatever scientists say is fine, and they are always debating each other. So therefore, philosophy can take any position.
Thank you for engaging with that question as well. I want to switch a little bit and do something I haven't done yet in any of these videos. And first, I would say I will share some of my views that are not the views of a philosopher, anyways. So not worth very much. But in my awareness of the Bahá'í writings, I have heard other people mention that there are elements in the Bahá'í writings that remind them of particular philosophers. Kant, I think, is a good example in many ways. Several people have referred to that. And then Aristotle and Plato, especially in the writings of Abdul-Baha, that's also pretty obvious to some extent. But when I think of like a full kind of larger philosophy being present, imbibing the Bahá'í writings, I can only kind of think of two types. One is, and it's probably because I'm so limited and it's not my discipline. One is something like, especially in terms of cosmology, something that looks like Sufi philosophy. And to me, because I know a little bit about it, Ibn Arabi, but it might be other names in that tradition, but something around that side. So some kind of version of Neoplatonism that has been developed via Sufi philosophy. And I think that's really the reason I find that important is because when I say cosmology, what I really mean is names and attributes, which is a kind of key concept in many directions. And also it links to all those stages of mystical development in the language, the poetic language of the writings of Baha'u'llah. So that's one side of it. and it's up for debate and discussion. And Joshua Hall made a very powerful argument for Avicenna. And I think the second part is, and this is more difficult for me. I think I discern elements of a political philosophy, and to some degree, that seems to me to have some connection to Rumi and Ibn Arabi, but not in a very direct way, in a very distant way, maybe. Uh, and some of it might relate to Western traditions, some might not, and this is so. I feel, for example, the idea of the unity of humankind exists in some form in Rumi and maybe Ibn Arabi, but unity of humankind at the level of global governance doesn't, I think, exist in those traditions, and might not also exist in the modern Western traditions of that time. At least that's a discussion. That's a discussion that I think is carried out in two books, and these are the only two books that I know that look at the issue of political philosophy. One is Juan Cole's Modernity and the Millennium. The other one is Nader Saiedi's Logos and Civilization, which dedicates the last two chapters to contesting elements of Cole's work, basically. And I don't think the debate has really resolved the issues, but it has helped a lot. And I kind of, my feeling is that Cole might be generally right in emphasizing that in some respects, Baha'u'llah was much more in favor of political democracy and even maybe liberal democracy than we consider him to be at this present moment. At the same time, that would not extend in every direction the way some would like it. And I think it's possible that, like Cole argues, Baha'u'llah was also not afraid to stand up or defy the state when it encroached on human rights, marginalized the poor, or trampled on the freedom of religious thought. At the same time, the Baha'u'llah's emphasis on consultation seems, based on Cole's account, to have been not just epistemic, but political in some way, in the sense that it refers to a political order. Consultation was, in a way, the solution to the problems and excesses that came with absolute monarchy, or even with decision making within an absolutist monarchy, where Baha'u'llah seemed to have advocated a powerful role for ministers in decision making at that level. And I think that's where his approval and espousal of the constitutional monarchy, parliamentary governance, and constitutionalism comes from. And it's also interesting for me, if Cole's argument is correct, that the local assemblies that were formed were meant to mirror this kind of consultative form of community self-government. And that would have been created particularly to challenge the Shiite system of dominance by clerics. So you have this move from a system where one cleric has a lot of authority, and the laymen owe him blind obedience in that community, to a system of consultation. So from that angle, I see like there is a political philosophy there, or elements that somebody has to grapple with this. And on the other hand, I also agree with Nader Saiedi when he says that when we speak about global governance, the categories that Baha'u'llah uses are qualitatively different from those of nation-state-centered liberal political philosophy. And they cannot be traced to, at least that's his argument. I can't prove it or disprove it, but that they cannot be traced to other currents of thought in the West, such as that of Saint Simon, which is something Cole tries to argue. So I kind of, based on what I've seen at the moment, temporarily, I agree with Saiedi when he says that although Enlightenment philosophy spoke of equality and democracy, it accepted the nation state as the largest legitimate unit of analysis. I see Baha'u'llah as a political thinker where his notion of the oneness of humankind is expressed as a principle of global governance. And so from that point of view, the central level of analysis is global. And in that way, Baha'u'llah does not reject the Enlightenment, but seems to go beyond it by announcing, for example, an ethic of world citizenship. So in that, I see, at least from what I've seen in these two books, a considerable degree of innovation. And maybe this has not been discussed as much as, the other issues of philosophy. I don't know if you have any takes on this. It's not a discussion that happens very often.
Well, thank you for that question. And I think, as always, it has many topics to sort out. Let me start with the first one. The first one was about the presence in Baha'i sacred writings, various elements of philosophical thought. My dear friend, my dear late friend and colleague in Kluge dedicated a lot of his writings to this topic, and I agree with him that Baha'i writings, by and large, use the Aristotelian vocabulary when it comes to philosophical issues. So Aristotle, why Aristotle? If you look at the history of philosophy, Aristotle is probably the only, well, first of all, he's the first systematic Western philosopher who, as a philosopher, who said, who developed his philosophical systems in ontology or metaphysics, in epistemology, well, maybe not so much in epistemology, but still he had a political philosophy, he had philosophy of beauty, aesthetics, ethics, the nature of the soul. So he is the systematic philosopher, and he was the center of attention for medieval philosophy for at least 1 millennium or more. So his thought is universal in this respect, and his thought is respected by everyone, whether you agree with him or not. So that may be one of the reasons, because Aristotle would be understood by East and West in all parts of the world. Number two, Baha'i sacred writings do mention other philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and sometimes Abdul Baha is not mentioning the names of the philosophers, but the concepts he introduces are parallel, to say the least. I do not know whether he knew about John Locke or Kant. He never mentioned Immanuel Kant, but when asked the question about knowing the essences of things, he explicitly repeats what Kant says, and he explicitly rejects Aristotle. He says that human beings cannot know the essences of things. We have no ability to know that. That is a very Kantian, anti-Aristotelian view. So on the one hand, Baha'i faith, Baha'i scriptures use philosophical terminology and present a variety of philosophical topics. There is no doubt about that. And maybe those scriptures are the most philosophical of all the scriptures of other religions. However, I do not think that Baha'i philosophy in general, by using this potential, and this potential is enormous, I don't think that Baha'i philosophy should follow one straight line, as I said. These are potentials for different philosophical systems. And I think that's what we see, at least the beginning of this. We see already Many Baha'is, for example, are inclined to Neoplatonism, Bahá'í Neoplatonism. They use the term panentheism, not pantheism, which Abdu'l-Baha rejects, but panentheism. Let's not dwell, let's not go into details, but personally, I'm not a Neoplatonist, and therefore, my direction in philosophy goes sideways. But I'm sure there will be other philosophical directions. And I think Baha'is sacred scriptures have enormous philosophical potential. This is obvious to me, at least. Number two, political philosophy. This is one of the points of contention because political philosophy, unlike ontology or epistemology, relates directly to the growth of the Baha'i community. Well, let me give you a concrete example, which is very painful for me. Russia. I've had tons of conversations with Russians about the Baha'i principle of non-involvement in politics. We all know that Baha'is try not to involve themselves in politics because it creates conflict, especially in partisan politics, etc., etc. But here is the problem. If you live in the United States, non-involvement in politics means one thing. If you now live in Russia, non-involvement in politics means a totally different thing. So in the United States, I can openly state what I think, and that has nothing to do with politics. In Russia, if you say the word war, you will be imprisoned for a political statement, which means that not to support Putin as a dictator would means to be involved in politics. And many people who are not Baha'is, but who like the Baha'i faith and who would like to become Baha'is have serious doubts because of that. They email me and they ask me, do Baha'is really support tyrannies? Do they support totalitarian regimes? Does this mean that they reject the freedom of conscience? I cannot speak my views if I'm against Putin. I try to explain them that they are living in the tyrannical state. And if you live in the tyrannical state, it's very difficult because everything is politicized. The food that you are making is politicized. And therefore, you have to either shut up completely, or just move away from this country. While I live in the United States, am I forbidden to say that I'm against tyranny and against Putin? No. Am I forbidden to say that I don't like Trump? No. Am I forbidden to vote? No. I'm encouraged to vote. I'm forbidden not to participate in parties political. I'm an independent voter, but I can vote my conscience. Can I participate in social causes, for example, alleviation of hunger, or gender equality, or racial equality. Not only I am forbidden to do that, I'm encouraged to do that. And that is not seen as a participation in politics, because politics and civil society are divided in the United States. But in any tyrannical government, there is no civil society. There is only the will of the tyrant. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because I've done some videos in Russian about the Baha'i faith. They have nothing to do with politics. They were simply expositions of the basics of the Baha'i teachings. And my Russian friends complained to me. They emailed me, we talked via Zoom, and they asked me to remove those videos. I said, why? They said, because we do not want to be associated with anything American. Because we are asked, interrogated by FSB, the Secret Service, so often. They want any excuse to close us forever. And if we are associated with the United States, and you may say something that is considered to be political, you say something in other videos that you are against Putin, against war, then as a Baha'i, you will be associated with us, and we will suffer as a consequence. You know, that is the situation I never dealt with. And I removed the videos. It is very true that any word you speak may have negative influence on other Baha'i communities in other parts of the world. So that's why I think political philosophy is a controversial issue, not because it is a controversial issue by itself, but it is a controversial issue because authoritarian movements are on the rise. And in authoritarian states, involvement in politics means different things from what we experience in normal societies. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the subject matter itself, I've read both books that you mentioned. And my approach is, as always, different, or you may call it unique, whatever you like. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that Baha'u'llah was against tyranny. It's clearly seen in all of his letters. There could be no doubt in my mind that Baha'u'llah accepts constitutional monarchy almost as an ideal form of government. He explicitly says so. He seems to be favoring Republican democracies as well in his letter to the presidents of the Americas. But when it comes to the political vision of the Baha'i faith, I think the most important distinction is not between monarchy or theocracy or democracy, but between the principle of absolute power and the separation of power. So the separation of power is the pillar of civilization. The absolute power is the feature that makes human society look like it is the society of the animals. It is the animal principle of organization. You have animals led by one person. The whole history of humanity shows us that humanity slowly, with great pain and suffering, but is moving from the principle of absolute power, tyrannies, oppression, etc., to I would say, the distribution of power to various people and groups. And if we look at Baha'i writings from this perspective, we will clearly see the Baha'i stand. Baha'is stand for the distribution, the dispersion of power. It is seen in the principle of consultation. It is seen in the principle of election. It is seen as the principle of collective government, universal house of justice. 9 people is not just one person. It is seen in Baha'u'llah supporting, parliaments. It is seen in Baha'u'llah supporting the creation of the universal tribunal and the mechanisms by which it will be functioning. There is no way to disregard that. Plus, Baha'i scriptures are the first and only scriptures so far that introduce the separation of powers into the religious organization. In the Will and Testament of Abdul Baha, we see that he is trying to do the separation through the office of the guardian, who has the right to interpret the scriptures, but does not have the right to authority over the community, and the Universal House of Justice, which does have the authority over the community, but does not have the authority to interpret. This is the first known to me example of the principle of separation that is introduced in religious scriptures. Now, to say further, what was my next thought? Yes, let me finish with one point again about global governance. The idea of the separation of powers was formally introduced in England in the 13th century by the so-called Magna Carta, when they, for the first time, established the norms of governance, the distinction between the federal and the state authority. Abdul Baha is saying that Baha'is should look at the American example, that it separates the authority of the federal government, state governments, and local governments. So I think the future of good global governance lies in human beings able to create for the first time in history checks and balances on the global level, to separate global governance from national governance from state governance, national governance from local governance. And as Abdul Baha tells us, our time is the time of decentralization. So more power to the localities. The national government still remains the main unit, so to say, because the representatives of the national governments elect, for example, the tribunal, the international tribunal, and the global governance does its own thing, but I don't know which thing, but the principle of this dispersion of power, I think, is completely in tune with the Baha'i teaching. And it doesn't really matter how we call it: democracy, theocracy, theodemocracy, spiritual democracy, spiritual constitutional monarchy, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
I really appreciate this answer. I didn't see this one coming, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So I like it. I'm gonna switch the topic a bit. I'm just curious about this. Can we turn to Sophiology, maybe? So I kind of vaguely remember that Soloviev was a key figure in Sophiology, and he was before but influencing the Russian avant-garde, which was then followed by communism and socialist realism, and that continues until recent times and today. So I feel like asking, what should Baha'is know about Sophiology? Because we should know about it, I think. It's an very important tradition. But how does it relate, or how does it develop on that axis of history from Soloviev to Russian modern contemporary thought of like that cycle? Maybe it's an unbearable question so late in the interview.
It's a pretty broad question.
Yeah.
Look, I wrote my dissertation, defended my dissertation on Soloviev's Sophiology, and the reason I did that was because I wanted to make sense of my own Russian tradition. I studied in the Soviet university, and the Soviet education was peculiar, to say the least. We studied the history of religions, taking the course that was called scientific atheism. So therefore, I wanted to come back to my own tradition and to make some kind of judgment about the value of it. Sophiology is a form of Neoplatonism. It is Neoplatonism. It is Panentheism. Yes, Soloviev was an intriguing person in the Russian intellectual landscape because he was a philosopher, a mystic, and a poet. He had some personal mystical visions of Sophia. He even went to Egypt to actually have this vision. And as a result, he wrote his famous poem, Three Meetings. And his philosophy is based on his mystical visions. Now, although he is very influential, I think Soloviev's philosophy is a dead end. Personally, I'm not a Neoplatonic kind of guy, number one. Number two, Soloviev was in the middle of the two competing Russian intellectual currents, the so-called Westerners and Slavophiles. To put it briefly, the Westerners wanted Russia to become a normal Western country. The Slavophiles wanted Russia to come back to their Orthodox tradition. And Soloviev, he started as a Slavophile, but later on he realized that Slavophiles are nationalists. And he believed that nationalism will make Russia miserable. So he occupied an intermediary position between Westerners and Slavophiles. So he wanted Russia to be modernized, but at the same time without losing its roots. And with that purpose, he developed his whole philosophy, being deeply rooted in the Russian Christian tradition, and at the same time being influenced by contemporary Western philosophy. Practically speaking, and that is the conclusion I'm making in my dissertation, is that Soloviev's philosophy was an intellectual attempt to modernize Russia without putting her in danger of going either extremely socialist or extremely capitalist. This was one of the responses to modernity, to the Enlightenment. Unfortunately, Russian people are people of the extremes. They always choose extremes. It's either get rid of God completely or only God, nothing else, only our religion, etc. And they rejected Soloviev and his program. There were some followers in the end of the 20th century, people who developed the so-called, I would say, modern orthodoxy. It was not liberal, but it was modernized, not in terms of rituals, but in terms of general attitude toward other religions and toward the world itself. Soloviev is a very, very good person from all sides of view, almost a saint in his personal life, never married. And I think that, again, his Sophiology was an attempt to reform Russia from inside. So I take Baha'u'llah and his vision of a female as a continuation of this Sophiological trend, not in Russian philosophy, but generally speaking, because for Baha'u'llah, this was the symbol of a much more radical reform than in the case of Soloviev. And I would love to write an article comparing Soloviev's Sophia with Baha'u'llah's vision of this eternal feminine. By the way, the theme of eternal feminine goes through many of the modern writings in Goethe, for example, in Germany, in Russia, in Soloviev, in Baha'u'llah, whose vision was not of the angel Gabriel, like in Islam, and not of any angel, but if that was an angel, it was a female angel.
Yeah, the Maid of Heaven.
Yeah, the Maid of Heaven. And to me, that is a very interesting development of Sophiology. But again, if Soloviev wanted to reform the Russian intellectual field, Baha'u'llah is reforming the global intellectual field. Just one more point, Abdul Baha, in one of his works, Traveler's Narrative, I believe, he was proposing his own plan for the reforms in Persia. And his plan for reforms was very much like the plan of Soloviev for Russia, because Abdul Baha is trying to find the middle way between complete Westernization and complete, what is the opposite? Coming back to the Persian sources, roots, religion, and rejecting the West completely. So he's proposing a moderate way to modernize Persia. And that is exactly what Soloviev was trying to do in Russia, but he failed.
That's, again, it's a line of argument that now makes a lot of sense to me, but I didn't think about it that way. I remember my only contact, I think, with Soloviev was through a book called Vladimir Soloviev and the Spiritualization of Matter by Oliver Smith. And I was very impressed at the time because it seemed that Soloviev developed an entire philosophy from just the notion of Christology, or like what is the nature of the prophet, or in Baha'i language of the manifestation of God. So it was very interesting for me because I was thinking, well, no Baha'i has done this yet, an attempt to develop a philosophy from the notion of what is the manifestation of God, as it were. So yeah, it's very creative. But I can see now that you've said that, he was trying to find a balance between those two tendencies in his society. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. I think that I have thrown at you all the questions that I had.
I think so too.
So I don't know if you feel like you want to say anything else, please go ahead. Otherwise, I think we can end it here.
The only other thing that I would mention is that I'm happy that you didn't ask anything about my theory of religious cycles, but that theory has little to do with anything that we discussed today. So whoever is interested may just buy a book and read it, or find some videos in English on my YouTube channel, Misha Impossible.
Yeah. Thank you. So the only reason I didn't ask is because I think that requires significant conversation, because you're going through several religious traditions at the same time, mapping their entire history and phases, and that takes a particular audience. But thank you so much. This has been incredible for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.